Welcome to this session of the Beyond the Veil Summit, where we'll explore the nature of the veil between worlds. I'm Joy Donnell, Vice President of Media with the Shift Network, and I'm thrilled to be speaking with our summit host, Lisa Bonnice. We'll be discussing healing relationships across the veil. Lisa Bonnice is multifaceted. She is an award-winning author, a former stand-up comedian, love to hear more about that, and program host with the Shift Network, where she has spoken with luminaries such as Greg Braden, Anita Morjani, and Thomas Hobel. Her first book, Shape-Shifting, the Body, Mind, Spirit Weight Solution, includes a foreword by Neil Donald Walsh, and her most recent novel, a metaphysical comedy called The Puppet Master, is available wherever books are sold. Her latest book, The Maxwell Curse, is a work in progress about breaking the ties that bind us to our family legacies. That is such a timely topic. So Lisa, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you, Joy. I've been looking forward to spending some time with you for weeks, ever since we scheduled this. So I'm looking forward to this. Thank you.
I have too. And, as I mentioned when we were kind of talking about this beforehand, you are going to be so generous with yourself as someone who has hosted this summit before. And you've hosted so many conversations with luminaries that have talked about our potential with healing grief, ancestral healing, and things of that sort. You have a very personal connection to this conversation about healing across the veil, healing these relationships once someone has passed to another plane of existence. And so I'd love to start there if we can. I think you have a story to share about your mom, Joann, that you had a really fantastic relationship and then things changed. Will you tell us what caused the rift with your relationship with your mom that kept being present even after she was gone?
Yeah. I've made brief mentions of my mom in various summit sessions, so some folks might have picked up on the fact that there's a story there, but I've never really told much of it. Mostly, to protect my mom's privacy. But it's time to tell the story. The short version is that she ended up dying of dementia after years of struggling with it, and a lot of damage was done along the way. As anyone with a similar story can relate, it's hard to watch your parent go through something like this, especially since mom and I always got along. We had the usual tiffs and struggles that mothers and daughters have. Sometimes we drove each other crazy. At least I thought we got along. And it wasn't until my dad died in 2011 that I and others in the family realized that mom had been putting on an act for a long time, and dad had been covering for her. And we didn't see this until he wasn't there as her mask. Mom was a lot more broken than any of us realized. And by the way, this is actually what led me down the path into ancestral healing, but that's another story entirely. Anyway, once dad wasn't there anymore to cover for her, we began to see who she really was, who she'd been, hiding all these years. And at the same time, she was recovering from cancer, and she eventually developed dementia, which changed her behavior. Like it evaporated her filter. She was no longer able to stop herself from saying really hurtful things that she was thinking that she never said out loud before. And she wouldn't apologize for any of this. So it became really hard to care for her, not just for me, but for everybody in the family. It was very difficult as her health deteriorated. And I actually moved across the country after dad died to help her. But even that kind of huge sacrifice wasn't enough for her. We couldn't do enough for her. And I know that this is a really common story for people whose parents develop dementia, but knowing that doesn't make it any easier to find your way through it. And by the time she died 3 years ago, even though I spent her final years sincerely trying to be compassionate and understanding, a lot of damage was done, and I had a genuinely hard time not holding some serious grudges against her and her ghost. And from what I've learned about death and dying and the afterlife, I do believe that she was a ghost. She hadn't crossed over into the pearly gates. She was sticking around and sticking it to us. And she haunted me and others in the family, and it was really hard to have warm, fuzzy feelings for her. And I was sort of stuck there for a long while until just very recently.
Again, you're speaking something that I think a lot of people have experienced or are experiencing right now, right? They know this person, they've known this person, their parent, since they came into the world. And then suddenly that person is completely different. And even though you understand the circumstances that you mentioned before, still, once you hear something, it's hard to unhear it. Once you see something, it's hard to unsee it, right? And so I can definitely relate to how you said she was a ghost in so many ways, because it was almost like a shell of herself. And she's there in the physical form, but what you're experiencing is not who you had known her to be this entire time. So once she was gone, once she had passed over, how were you processing everything that you had experienced? Like, how were you sitting with it in her absence?
It was oh gosh, that was, I think, the hardest part, because we tried so many things while she was still alive. We all tried to get counseling. We got her counseling, or we tried to get her counseling. We tried to get various priests to come help her to come to terms with what was happening to her, to no avail. We tried to help her prepare for what her Catholic upbringing told her was a face-to-face meeting with God, where she'd have to answer for her, what were minor sins. And she never did anything that I know of that was bad enough to make her so fear meeting her maker, but she wanted nothing to do with any of it. So she eventually ended up in an assisted living facility, and we made sure that it was a good one that took good care of her. And we visited as often as we could, but none of that was enough, and nothing that we did along mainstream lines was working. And then once she did cross over, we were just sort of left, just sort of going, what just happened? As if we'd all been hit by a truck. And I know when I say this, that people who've experienced this will take this to heart, because it's hard to say, but we were relieved when she passed. It's like, oh, thank God it's over. Not just for her, that she's no longer suffering, but that we don't have to watch this happening anymore. So then on top of all of that, you're dealing with the guilt of, I wished my mom would die. And there's no way to sugarcoat that feeling. So it was really, there were a lot of layers that we had to try to sift through. And it's again, it's one of those things that only somebody who's been through this can really comprehend the complexity and the mind games that you play with yourself.
Thank you for sharing that, because again, I think you are speaking to those layers that people go through, right? Like, you are human, you're going to have a full range of human emotions that range from complete and utter despair and grief, to anger, to denial, to just wanting it to be over so that you don't have to keep witnessing someone you love so much deteriorating in a way that is so much suffering, not just in the body, not just pain in the body, but seems like suffering in the mind as well. So let me ask you about some of those layers and some of that sifting through that you talked about. Once your mom was no longer here, and okay, now you've got a little bit of a reprieve from the onslaught of the daily struggle that was watching her deteriorate from the disease. But now you're sitting with everything that happened, and the lack of closure, if you will, and how to reconcile everything that you've been through. What did you decide to do on your own to try to make things right now that she was, again, on the other side, not here in the physical plane with you anymore?
Well, it was something that I knew that we had to do. Of course, I've done enough inner work to know that it's not healthy to hang on to this kind of stuff. But it wasn't until after she passed, as you mentioned, once she stopped, pouring lemon juice into the 1,000 paper cuts that she kept inflicting, that I was even able to begin to try to let go of, all the flinching whenever I thought of her, this PTSD. But it helped that I really wanted to. I didn't want to feel this way about my mom because she really did have a lot of really good qualities in many ways. When she was younger, she was a great mom. She was a great person. She had a terrific sense of humor. She was a Girl Scout leader for me when I was a kid. She was an incredibly talented artist. I have several of her paintings hanging in my house, but she didn't want me to have any of her paintings. So there's that side, the two sides of it, where she's wonderfully gifted, but she's very clenching with, she didn't want to share anything. But she would also teach me to use my own creative gifts. And she did what she could in the areas of life where she wasn't broken. But that brokenness overtook her as the dementia took over. And one of the things that I learned in my study of ancestral healing, though, is that it's not our work to heal our troubled ancestors. It's the work of our well ancestors to do that. So I set my mom and my resentments aside and asked my well ancestors to take care of, again, her haunted ghost. When she crossed, she didn't go into the light. She was, hovering around and making people miserable. And I didn't used to believe in ghosts until it happened. But anyway, in the meantime, I learned as much as I could about her family history and found an incredible story that I've talked about elsewhere. People are probably familiar with this, where her own father was severely damaged as a result of being orphaned as a teenager when his mother died of cancer and his father was killed shortly afterward in this massive coal mine explosion that killed over 170 men. And it's an amazing story that I'm writing a book about, which she didn't want me to do, telling family secrets. But going back to what damaged her, my grandfather must have suffered survivor's guilt, for his own reasons. He was a lousy, rotten father who abandoned his own kids. And she never forgave him. So understanding that these things about how she became so broken really helped. But it wasn't until I talked to a few experts in after-death communication in last year's Beyond the Veil Summit that I began to feel a little better about doing this, because she had found a way to communicate with me through them, because I was so closed off to hearing from her. She had to push her way through to get to me, and she got really creative. Like, for example, when I was interviewing Suzanne Giesemann last year, she's an evidential medium. She's very trustworthy and very matter of fact. And before we began our official interview on Suzanne's work, this lamp behind me, it began flashing. And it never does that because the wiring is very sturdy. It's a very well-made lamp, so it was really unusual. And I mentioned that to Suzanne, how weird this lamp is flashing, because I'm seeing it, on my camera. And Suzanne immediately tuned in and she said, "I'm hearing mom. Is your mom on the other side? Because she's coming through very strongly." And I was really fascinated, but also I was surprised to feel that I was still so angry. I thought I had gotten over it. And I knew that mom in her human form would be mad that I even had that lamp. So I was really dubious about that. She wanted to send a message to me. She'd never been supportive of my writing career, and in fact was sometimes a saboteur, something I didn't find out until years later. And that's one of the reasons I found it so hard to forgive her. She was always afraid of me telling family secrets, as I mentioned earlier, even though we don't really have any secrets. And that's not what my work was about anyway. But she was always afraid that I would open my mouth and tell things I shouldn't be saying. Although that's kind of what I'm doing right now. But I'll talk about that in a minute. This is what she was afraid of, that I would expose our lack of perfection. So anyway, Suzanne told me that mom now understood that, because she's on the other side, she understands that my writing about her father's story wasn't all about gossiping and spilling tea. It's about healing family lineages. And she was okay with that now that she understood what I was doing, and she supported it. Suzanne said she would help me with it and would stop blocking me. And so that was nice, but I was still very, resistant, because apparently I had a lot more anger than I realized. But since then, I've spoken with Suzanne and other mediums and shamanic practitioners who specialize in ancestral healing. And mom has come through numerous times. In fact, another time she had Suzanne tell me to watch for owls, that's the sign that she was with me and trying to communicate. So within the next few days, I saw countless owls online, but I felt really doubtful because, algorithms, our devices are always listening and placing things that hears in our news and ad feeds. So I asked for a sign that wasn't online. And I shared this story in this year's summit during my interview with Suzanne, so our viewers may have heard it. I was walking through the neighborhood and I asked Mom, in my head, if this is real, please show me an owl that's not online. And this would be unusual because I live in Phoenix. We don't have a lot of owls around here. So this is a challenge. But before I even finished the sentence, I felt this nudge to look across the street at the rooftop of one of the houses I was just about to walk past. And I saw a ceramic owl installed on a chimney, to scare critters from climbing down the flue. And I was pretty impressed, but even more so when after I told Suzanne about it, she explained how it happened. In her view, I thought it was just this marvelous synchronicity, but Suzanne suggested that as I was walking past that owl, Mom put the thought in my head to look up at that moment. Mom said, ask me to show you an owl because there's one right there. So she managed to reach across the veil and communicate with me. And that was, I think, the beginning of my realization that, okay, she wants to make amends. She wants to communicate and have a relationship with me again. It was very powerful.
That is so beautiful to think that, okay, you're of course going to have doubts because you're a logical, reason-based human being. And like say you were aware of algorithms. So you were like, okay, it's real easy for the algorithm to keep showing me the thing that I searched for already or saw or had a response to or said aloud. But then to have that message from your mom come through to alleviate that doubt and reach out in a way to let you know she too wants to embrace the healing. So this, of course, goes to letting go, right? Like it's very difficult to heal when you're holding on. That adage of let go or get dragged does seem to keep being pretty true, right? So was that moment something that kind of freed you up and helped you start to release those things, release that resentment and actually reconcile? Or was there something else, other things compiled that really helped you start to let go of some of that resentment and anger that you were still feeling?
Mm-hmm. I wanted to. I really did. I was thrilled to pieces when I saw that. In fact, I took a picture of it with my phone and I made it my wallpaper. So it's still on my phone to this day. But I was still so tender, and I felt so betrayed. To trust her. I didn't know what to believe because her final years, we discovered she'd been saying horrible things about me to people behind my back, and I didn't know what to believe. And, it felt like, yeah, she's reaching out, but big deal. Is she reaching out just to mess with me like she had been before? And even after death, she really was a ghost. She was sort of like a poltergeist. She would mess with our lives. And so I didn't know, is she healed or was she still afflicted? And I wasn't going to take any chances. But it wasn't until this year's summit, there was this remarkable display of her message that it finally got through to me that she really is trying to make amends. I was interviewing Ann Pryor and Risa Kazmierski, and Ann was creating a soul painting. She was demonstrating the creation of a soul painting as we spoke and as Risa sort of narrated. And you've got to watch this session if you haven't seen it. Ann's intention was to create a soul painting with a message for anyone who is watching the session now or in the future. It's sort of a group reading, if you will. And I was intrigued to see how she was tapping into the collective vibe of everyone who would ever view this session. I find that kind of thing really fascinating. But as she painted, I noticed that her work began to remind me of one of my mom's paintings. In fact, one of my favorite paintings of hers that hangs here in my house, which, by the way, she would not have been happy that I have, at least when she was still in her human suit. And as we talked, Ann and Risa and I talked, it became clear that Mom was behind the scenes helping to create the painting through Ann. She was delivering a message to me in the form of a piece of art. And all she ever wanted to do was paint. She said this so many times in her final years. She was, uh, all I want to do is paint. But she lost her ability to do it as her faculties collapsed, and she got very angry about this, and she lashed out at people. This was the biggest heartbreak of her life when she lost her ability to paint. But here she was painting this gorgeous picture for me. And it was the most amazing peace offering I've ever heard of. And for the first time in over 10 years, that's the first time that I've really felt at peace with my mom. And it had to happen in these bizarre circumstances. You know, I'm hosting this summit, and there's an artist who she was, yeah, that's how she managed to reach through. I don't know how she could have done it in any other way to make such a powerful impact.
Wow, that is amazing on so many levels, right? Like it's a lot to process when you think that, okay, there's the message of the flickering light, right? There's the actual dropping the thought into your head of, oh, asked to see an owl that isn't online. And then you look at them, boom, there that is. And then to be present in that moment with something that she so loved doing, art, and using the energy of that moment to convey a message to you. And again, you are here, you know, like in your life, in your world, hosting these conversations, you know, like talking to the psychic mediums and the experts in after death. And they're communicating to you and also telling you, oh, Lisa, this is what you're seeing, right? This is what's happening. This is what's going on. So after having these conversations and these realizations and, you know, like these awareness moments that are getting pointed out to you, did you find that your own ability to actually communicate directly with your mom ended up improving, or was it still something elusive to you?
It did. Now we have to remember that this specific episode just happened days ago. So I'd already been feeling that my abilities to communicate with others. I've had some stunning stories that I've shared in other summit episodes, but communicating with mom just in the time since the painting occurred, it's different. It's only been a couple days, so I sort of feel this lightness, like a weight has been lifted off of my shoulders. That, you know, my mom doesn't hate me, you know. And I guess I didn't realize that I felt that way until I didn't feel that way. And I can feel, how can I say this? I can feel her presence, and she looks about 30 years old, and she seems to be so relieved that she finally got through to her thick-headed daughter, that I finally have gotten the message from her after all of these efforts. And she's been trying. But again, I was just holding so many resentments that it just wasn't getting through. So now I think that now that I've allowed myself to accept, okay, yes, she means well, I think the messages are going to come through a lot more easily.
It's beautiful. So let me ask you, especially since you are such a creative person, have there been other things that you've done personally for yourself to work through those emotions, right? And to keep grounding yourself in what you're realizing, even though I know one of them was just a couple of days ago, but just as you've been having this journey, have there been other things that you've been bringing into your life, other kinds of practices, even perhaps, to help you keep like being grounded in what you're learning and staying open to the healing process that you're experiencing?
Yeah, actually, there is. I don't want to veer too much into the ancestral healing realm because we do a whole summit on that as well. But that is genuinely my tool. That is the practice that I use. I work with my ancestors. I know that there are some who are still very, very wounded, and I would like to help in any way that I can to help them, you know, go into the light, as it were. So I really strongly connect with my well, true ancestors. And because my mom's, this one lineage in my family was so badly damaged, I send them a lot of love and a lot of healing energy, and I dedicate my life to working with them. In fact, I'm sort of getting a message. Tell this story, because I wasn't planning to, but the painting that I mentioned, that my mom painted, that's hanging in my house, that reminded me of the one that Anne was painting live. I went and took a picture of it afterwards, and I sent it to Anne to say, look how similar these are. And I didn't really think about the fact that this was a painting of poppies. And I've been heavy duty researching one of my ancestors who was killed in World War I. And in fact, with my session in this summit with Linda Backman, we talked about the fact that I am most likely a reincarnation of this young man who was killed at the age of 22 and who's come back to help heal this family lineage. So the fact that this young man was killed in World War I was probably him, and poppies are symbolic of veterans. So she painted poppies, and now I have this painting of poppies, and that's the one that there's just all of this interwoven connections that I know if you try to tell somebody the stories, if they're not into this kind of stuff, you sound a little crazy, but you can't deny when so much just keeps washing over you that there's so many connections. How can you not make something of them?
That's so beautiful. And the message is for you, right? So it can make sense that others wouldn't get it if they're not into this, because it's not the message for them. It's the message for you, so that you are able to be aware of what's going on and what it is that you can receive in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, I know that there's a lot of people, listening to this, watching this, and they are thinking, my goodness, this is speaking to me on a cellular level, and they're just not quite sure where to even begin. Right. So based upon what you've come to, learn so far in your journey, what are some things you can recommend to others that they want this kind of healing? They want to be able to reach across the veil like this and start to have that reconciliation, but they're not quite sure where to start.
Yeah. Oh, I know it's so hard. Believe me, I know it's hard. But I learned, I think the most important thing that I learned was that my resentment really was keeping a wall up between us. I mean, I know that sounds like just this sort of pat cliche answer, and I really had good reasons to keep that wall up. And as I mentioned, I've learned in ancestral healing process that we need to keep wounded ancestors at arm's length until they're healed. We don't let them in because they will mess with our lives. They think they're still alive, and they're angry that we're ignoring them, or so they cause mischief. So we keep them away. It's not our work to do that healing. It's our work to protect ourselves from harmful ghosty type beings. But I was getting messages. I was getting healthy messages from the other side that I was refusing to acknowledge. I really allowed myself to stew in my anger and resentment, even though I would tell myself, oh, how compassionate and understanding I was trying to be. Oh, I know that my mom suffered, and I know that she had all these brokenness and blah, blah, blah. And, I would pat myself on the back. Oh, what a good daughter you are, understanding. But deep down, I was still really pissed. So I think I would recommend to others in a similar situation, because a heartbreaking number of us have parents with dementia that we've cared for in their later years. Only someone who's done it can comprehend how difficult it is. What I would recommend is to take care of yourself. I know you've heard this. Self-care is important. Do your inner work on forgiveness, and be careful about letting harmful ancestors in, but be open to loving overtures. Like I said, mom had been sending them, but I was being stubborn. Trauma can do that to you. It can make you overly cautious. I also recommend actually finding and working with a trustworthy medium or an ancestral healing practitioner, because some of this stuff you just can't do yourself. You really do need to call in the pros. And it can take a while. Allow yourself, some time, be patient. It's taken, 3 years for me to even consider allowing mom in, but her messages have been so loving, and she didn't give up. She's been so conciliatory that I cannot continue to hold the damage that she did when she was alive and still broken. I can't hold that against her. So all the compassion that I used to have for her story is still there. And it's really time that I demonstrate it, for both of our sakes.
Is self-care part of how you increased your compassion for yourself in this moment too?
Hmm. Yeah.
I cheat asking that question because I know you a little bit, so I'm able to dive into that. But was that one of the things that kind of increased your compassion towards you in the moment as well?
That I think was the biggest challenge for me because I was able to, take a long hot bath and do the kind of typical self-care things that we're told to do, but I wasn't able to do the things that I really needed to do to help myself because, there's that victim part of me. Oh, she's hurt me. I can't do this because of her. And so I think the biggest self-care that I did was acknowledge the fact that she was broken, but so am I. I didn't escape from the damage that's been passed down in her family lineage. So I think by acknowledging that this is not just one person, this is an ancestral line that needs to be healed. That to me was the self-care, actually doing the ancestral healing work.
I love that. So we've been having a great conversation so far. And before we wrap, I want to know, is there anything else that we haven't talked about yet that you're feeling called upon to share? Anything that's speaking to your heart that we haven't quite presenced yet in this conversation?
Yeah, a couple things. First, I want to say that I checked with mom to make sure that she's okay with me talking about this. And I can promise you that if she was not okay with it, this conversation would not be happening. Some mishap would have occurred. My computer would have blown up. My power would have been shut down. I would have developed laryngitis. Usually when I talk for this long a period, I start coughing because I'm not used to really spending this much time talking, but I'm fine. So this to me is mom's way of saying hello to everyone and that she approves this message. And I want to expound just a little bit on what I was saying a minute ago, that I realized that I am, my mother's daughter. And through epigenetics and ancestral trauma, I carry those wounds as well. I was broken in the same ways that she was. And I didn't realize it because I expressed the damage in my own way, through my own personality, through my own filter, through my astrological chart, whatever it is that causes our personalities to be different. I didn't realize that I was expressing the exact same damage, but in different ways. So as I heal myself, I help to heal her and our ancestors. And as I forgive her, I forgive myself and the generations before both of us who caused this damage, however unintentionally it may have been. And the ripple effect is just a beautiful thing to behold.
Oh, this is absolutely gorgeous. Well, okay. I want to ask you a couple more questions if you are feeling a little bit of a sense of play for a moment. Okay. If you think back to who you were back then, right when you started this journey of the healing, across the veil, if you could go back and you could tell your past self something, one thing, what would you tell past Lisa?
Hmm. I love this question because I actually do work with future and past selves all the time. So, but I haven't done this one yet. I think what I would do is I would go back and tell that Lisa, be patient. This is not going to happen overnight because, we all want that instant gratification. And while I'm doing the work, why isn't it happening? It's taking a lot longer than I thought it would. And that's been very frustrating. It's made it harder. But I'll tell you what, the stories that I've learned, the realizations that I have been utterly breathtaking. I cannot believe that my life isn't fiction. Because I mean, the things I've told just in this little half hour have been pretty unbelievable. But this is just scratching the surface. So yeah, I would tell myself, be patient. It's going to be an amazing ride.
That's beautiful. So, since you work with past and future self, what would you tell future Lisa right now?
Oh, let's see. I would actually, I would ask my future self. Um, hmm, what would I ask my future self? I think I would probably ask, oh, okay, here it comes. I would ask how I can make sure that I don't leave a similar legacy for my children. I've done what I can, I've been as conscious as I can, but we all make mistakes with our kids. And, I know my grandkids think that I'm really this groovy grandma, but my own daughters, they're my kids. So I think I would ask future Lisa, what was the best thing that you did to heal your relationship with your girls so that they don't have to do all this kind of work when you get old?
Oh, that's beautiful, Lisa. So, in the spirit of that, we talk so much about that ancestral healing, right? And the things that have followed us generation after generation. But what is a generational gift that you realize you have, and that you can presence right now and kind of really be in gratitude of that has passed down to you within your lineage?
Hmm. All right. Well, if we're my dad's lineage is saying, "Hey, talk about us too." So I should at least mention that my dad, he came from the Mediterranean. His father was from Malta, and it's the land of the grape. And so my dad wants me to say that I have a lust for life, and I love good food and all of these things and blah blah blah. So that's my dad's lineage. My mom's lineage, like I said, was very very broken, and a lot of horrible things happen to these people, and I've been really working very strongly with them. So what I'm learning was, before the break, before this, they just completely snapped. These people had these amazing gifts. They were Celtic. They had a real affinity for nature, a very animistic way of looking at things, and I've always had that within me, but I don't, or I haven't in the past really taken advantage of any kinds of abilities and affinities that come naturally to me because of that break. And now that that's being healed, I'm allowing myself to really, walk in my own power.
Oh, thank you for sharing that with us. That was so great too to hear about like both sides of your lineage and how that really like marries itself into the existence that we're being able to behold, that is you right now, and what you're, putting into the world. That's absolutely beautiful. So if we can just talk for a second about some of these amazing takeaways, right? Like the number one, of course, resentments against someone, they've got to be resolved if you have any shot at all of actually healing, right? So, and if that person is dead, that's going to be even harder, right? So, you've really got to start to figure out how to bring forgiveness into the scenario, as you spoke about. And that resentment, if you're holding on to it, seems to really be able to block any communication that you're going to have coming across the veil. But then sometimes you can't do it by yourself. So there's no shame in asking for help. Like you did, you actually reached out and you gathered experts, but you also went ahead and stayed open to receiving what was going on around you. This has just been an absolutely beautiful conversation. And thank you for giving us a little peek into what your healing journey has been with this, and how you opened yourself up, and how you really like work to reconcile the emotions that you went through. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with before we close this out?
I think probably that this is a huge relief. It really is. I've spent decades um, fearing, that my mom would once again somehow manage to sabotage me from using my voice, from achieving success or whatever it is. And I really feel like she and I are working together on this conversation, on my finally saying these things that need to be said without feeling like I'm betraying her. I feel like she's really with me now. And I don't know if I've ever felt that. So that's pretty cool.
I think we feel it too. Thank you so much, Lisa. I cannot thank you enough for doing this, holding space like this. And thank you to everyone who joined in and listened. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I know I certainly did. And that you're going to enjoy the rest of the Beyond the Veil Summit. Till next time, goodbye.